Many people think that since VR uses your real movement, game mechanics such as gun handling is going to be similar between titles, especially those who haven't had much first-hand experience. But once you play a few VR shooters, it becomes clear that VR only gives more possibilities for the developers to make their own gun handling more creative and unique. Handling weapons and interacting with items in VR is never the same as in real life. There's no recoil applied to your hands, and you're just holding your two hands up in the air while carrying a rifle in-game, which means you could move your hands closer or farther than your hand position in VR, and the game is left with the task of solving these issues without breaking your immersion. Pavlov approaches these issues with a simple yet intuitive solution, borrowing a lot of aspects from familiar flat-screen titles and aiming to be as predictive to newer VR players as possible. The developers went for the more simple floating hands instead of spending time working on an IK rig, which is obviously going to take much more time, sacrificing a little bit of immersion in favor of making the game more simple and sparing hours of development. It's also worth mentioning that the game does not feature more advanced movements such as climbing or even jumping. With that being said, the hand models are excellent, and they do offer some dynamic animations that make the game feel all the more polished. The scale of your first-person hands and guns seem to be just slightly larger than other games, while still maintaining realistic proportions, making guns much more prominent and sights all the more easier to see through. Even scopes have a very large field of view. So overall, the aiming experience is excellent in Pavlov, with some exceptions that we are going to mention later. Movement and gun controls are very straightforward and intuitive. When playing, you will always find the controls responsive, and you would rarely run into issues with movement or gun handling. This helps make the game feel much better, given the fast-paced nature of most game modes. The level of details on the guns is on par with what you'd expect from a VR shooter. All of the weapons feature high-quality textures and models, and while gun handling is not half bad, it's worth mentioning that it does not feature super realistic interactions. Some actions are simplified in order to make them easier to use, and the guns do not interact with physics directly, so you can move your gun through a wall. But of course the game is not going to allow you to shoot through it. This approach is obviously less immersive, but it's much more simple for newer VR players. With that being said, there's a lot of other satisfying details, such as hearing the sound of empty shells drop on the surface and seeing them as they fall. Default maps and environments, on the other hand, can be a little bit dull and do lack dynamic lighting. World War II maps and a lot of custom maps, on the other hand, offer much more interesting environments. It's also worth mentioning that the game is a little bit demanding, so I had to lower most of my settings to get consistent frame rate. While controls are mostly simple, there are some involved operations such as arming bombs, which requires you to type in the code manually with your own hand. Other interactions such as using the pie menu or controlling camera in spectator mode are very polished and snappy. The spectator mode itself is also not half bad, and it's perfect for an esports scene. In order to make the game more accessible and playable to the largest audience possible, most maps focus on short-range encounters, since in longer-range gunfights, headsets with low pixel density would have a severe disadvantage. The game compensates for this with the relatively high recoil and high time to kill. A few shots of your gun will send it flying, and you need to land as many shots as possible on your target, so even in close range, fights might drag on a little bit more than you'd expect. It's clear that the main aim of the developers was on making the gun handling as accessible and enjoyable as possible, but that did come at a price. Most of the original maps in the game are rather mediocre. This is where the Steam community maps come to save the day. The integration of workshop content is seamless, and the majority of servers are running modded maps. Those maps will download as soon as you start joining the server. Most of the workshop maps are ports of timeless classics, such as Nuketown, Rust, Aztec, and of course Dust 2. Maps that were made and polished over long periods of time. Custom community maps also include special game modes, such as DayZ-style survival maps and classic COD zombies with solvable Easter eggs. With that being said, the developers have been pushing the limits even further with the game, introducing World War II update, which is almost a completely new game on its own, featuring new weapons, maps, and even drivable tanks. Everything about World War II content has a unique feel to it. Remember what we said about the sights and weapon handling? This is a little bit different for World War II content. The developers decided to go for the slightly more realistic approach with the sights and made them a little bit more accurate to the World War II era. So both you and the enemy will struggle to operate your weaponry sometimes, and it does really make you realize how far our modern weaponry has advanced. This variety makes the player base lean more towards the chill and social side of game, rather than focusing on the competitive aspects. With that being said, you will find a lot of pro players, especially in game modes such as Search and Destroy. The UI in Pavlov is a mixed bag. On one hand, the main menu, scoreboard and buy menu are very well presented and function flawlessly, and on the other, the kill feed, vote notifications along with other notification pop-ups are horrible and really take away from the experience. There's a section in the training that I literally couldn't beat because of the training pop-up that was preventing me from being able to see what I'm supposed to be aiming at. And I know we can't ignore it anymore. So let's talk about the third-person animations. It's up to the developers to come with good IK rigs and solutions in order to sync the rest of the body, especially when your character is moving and you are stationary in real life. And this is one of those things with no nice way of putting it. Pavlov just fails miserably at this. Even when such problems don't exist, animations are broken and you can see that the hands don't seem to be grabbing the gun and they are just levitating around it instead of grabbing it. Although you don't notice it much when playing in the game, it's still annoying when you do. The game lacks animations of things such as inserting the magazines, and it just magically snaps into your gun. Of course, those magazines don't interact with your gun or your hands, since both of those do not have any collisions. Reloading can be difficult sometimes when you have high ping, since the state of the magazine seems to be server-sided. And sometimes when walking or moving around, it feels like the mag pouch position slightly shifts and you might not be able to always grab the magazine. The sound is another area where sometimes the game struggles. Most audio in the game seems to be two-dimensional, so rotating your head around won't help you in pinpointing what floor the enemy might be on, and footsteps sound the same through different floors. Some of the sound effects are good, while others are not so much. Explosions can sometimes be lacking, but things like sniper rifles have a very nice ring to them. Netcode in the game is another problem, and it's not on par of what you'd expect in 2021. You will very often find yourself dying to the person you just killed. I know it's funny at first, but then it can get a little bit annoying. Due to the high time to kill, weapons can feel a little bit unbalanced, and some of them are seriously underpowered or overpowered. And if I had to pick on the game, it would be for the default character models. World War II characters look just fine, but proportions and models of the default characters are just very dull and generic. With that being said, customization is said to be coming soon to the game. Overall, Pavlov VR might not be bringing any new innovations to the VR scene, but it most certainly is a sturdy base to build upon, and remains to this day the most popular multiplayer VR shooter. If I had to give this game a rating, it would be 7.8 out of 10. Thank you guys for watching, I hope you've enjoyed the video. I will be streaming later today, so if you want to hang out with me, go check my Twitch channel. I'll leave you with some clips of my last stream. This is from Black Ops 2, not the Black Ops 1 version, by the way.
No, it's I think from Black Ops 4 or something.
No, this is not the Black Ops 4 version.
If you don't die, if you die, you need to change. You need to buy it again.
And if I don't?
What? Oh my god!